Do you ever wonder exactly how people become chief of staff? What does that path even look like? I'm Catherine Berardi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Chief of Staff Collective podcast. Spoiler alert, there is no single path to follow to becoming chief of staff. Everyone's experience in landing a role like this is incredibly unique. In fact, many people actually don't seek it out in the first place. According to Mary Ostafi, it's a role that finds you. So many of us seek a job that will be more meaningful than just the daily grind. For Mary, her chief of staff position at Fairtrade USA is just that, more than a typical daily grind. It's an opportunity to empower others. Here's our interview with Mary Ostafi, the role that finds you.
Hi, my name is Mary Ostafi, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Fairtrade USA.
So let's start with you before becoming Chief of Staff. Describe your background and early career for us.
So my background is quite convoluted. I like to say that I'm a recovering architect turned social entrepreneur because I don't really know how else to explain it. Some people seem to come into this world and know exactly what they want to do and who they want to be and what they want to do when they grow up. And I'm just not one of those people. So I have done many things in my past. I started my career as an architect, focusing on green buildings and sustainability. And that led me to want to pursue sustainability to a higher level. So I went to graduate school and studied strategic leadership towards sustainability in Sweden. And coming back from that, I joined a global architecture firm and helped lead the development of their sustainability department, working on initiatives internally and also with clients. I became a specialist in LEED certification and other things. And at the same time, I was living in downtown St. Louis and recently coming back from Sweden, where I was introduced to urban agriculture. I just had this dying desire to start growing my own food and getting involved in that movement. So I kind of just started a grassroots initiative to start a community garden in downtown St. Louis. And it turned out to be a huge success. And the next thing I knew, I was founding a nonprofit and running a nonprofit on the side and just growing it over the years. And at the same time, I transitioned out of the corporate world because it was no longer meeting my needs in my profession. And I started working at Washington University in St. Louis in their sustainability department, which was really exciting. For about a year, I helped them develop a strategic plan around sustainability for campus operations. And at the same time, the nonprofit I had founded, Urban Harvest STL, was really starting to take off. So I became the first employee of Urban Harvest and started doing that full time and built up a network of urban farms in downtown St. Louis and built up a team and started an internship program and started hosting events on the farm. And most importantly, really developed a mission around food equity and making sure that the food that we were growing in the middle of the city were serving people that didn't necessarily have access to healthy food. So that is kind of my career path in a nutshell. And that's where I was before I started in this role as chief of staff.
It sounds very logical when you say it back, but I know that it's not when you're going through it. So I appreciate that. And it's very common for chiefs of staff to really not know what they want to do and sort of patchwork their career together. I mean, safe to say, though, in hearing that story, that your curiosity has been a common thread. Like you've sort of, it sounds like, just followed an interest that you've had. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I've always been curious. I'm definitely a lifelong learner. I'm always dabbling in new things. For me, it's really led from passion. When I start becoming passionate about something, then that really drives me to just fully immerse myself into whatever that is and obtain as much information as I can as quickly as possible and just kind of pivot my direction in that way. So all of these different experiences I've had have really been led by passion. And then throughout the process, just figuring out ways to connect them all together in a way that they build off of each other. So I kind of see these transitions as opportunities. Like, I'm not leaving behind a career in architecture, and I'm not leaving behind my project management skills from working at the university. I'm combining those into my next opportunity and leveraging those in maybe new and interesting ways in order to just kind of transition those skill sets into the appropriate setting.
I love that. You're not leaving behind, you're adding on from
Absolutely.
where you've been. I love that. So you're at Urban Harvest, which you've created from the ground up. How big was your team there?
When I left, we were a team of 6, as well as about 20 interns at any given time.
So you are killing it with this nonprofit in St. Louis. And then take us to present day, how you thought about a chief of staff role, how you ended up in the Bay Area, and what we can then talk more about your organization.
So I ended up in the Bay Area because my husband, who is also an architect, he had an opportunity to transfer out here with his current employer. And I have always been drawn to the West Coast, and together we've dreamed of living in the Bay Area for a long time. So when this opportunity came up, as hard as it was for me to leave Urban Harvest, I knew that we weren't going to pass this up. So I just went on LinkedIn and started just looking at jobs, because I honestly had no idea where I was going to go next. I knew it was going to be really difficult to leave the organization I founded, and I didn't know how I was going to work for somebody else again, and to work for an organization that I wasn't the founder of. So I knew that it had to be special, and because of that, I was specifically seeking nonprofits that shared a similar mission to Urban Harvest and my past. And quite quickly, Fairtrade USA came up. And as soon as I saw that, I remembered I had seen the TED Talk that the CEO had given years before, and it just resonated with me. Like, I felt like I already knew the organization. I already knew their mission. I was familiar with their seal, and it seemed like a really great fit. And when I was looking through their job opportunities, this peculiar position called Chief of Staff was posted. And honestly, I had no idea what that was. I wasn't really familiar with the role of Chief of Staff. But what I did know is, as I read through this role description, I said, I can do that. I can do that. I'm really excited about that. I know I can do this. And I don't think a role description could have been written for me more perfectly than that one. So just reading through that, I knew it was the right fit. It was one of few jobs that I actually applied for, and the only one that I actually wanted. It was almost synchronicity, like everything happens for a reason.
So what was it about the position description? Was it the variety of the work? Was it that partnership with the CEO? What do you think it was that resonated the most with you?
It was a little bit of all of that. First of all, it was just the organization itself and a good mission fit for me. Second of all, it was an opportunity to work alongside a seasoned social entrepreneur who I knew that I can learn a lot from. And then just the role in itself seemed so dynamic. Like, there were just many different components to it. I knew that it would be extremely challenging, and I would constantly be learning, which is a necessity for someone like me.
It's sort of a blend of everything that you're looking for. So every chief of staff background is unique. What I think is especially unique about yours is what you mentioned earlier, going from the number 1 seat to the number 2, right? Like founding a company and leading that organization, and then going now to a second in command to a CEO. Tell me more about that. Like, what were some of the challenges that you faced early on in sort of adjusting to that change?
I think I'll just take it one step back and just say, I couldn't just work for anybody or just any organization after having my experience with Urban Harvest. Like, I knew it needed to be the right fit with the right organization and the right person. And I felt that to be true through my interview process. So I was confident in that. The hardest part is probably just I no longer have complete control over my schedule and my agenda. my agenda is really the CEO's agenda and making sure that I'm supporting him and making sure that he's successful. So it's really taking a step back and leading from behind, which is the opposite from what I had been doing. But it's given me great perspective. I've learned patience. It's made me more humble. So I think overall, it's just been a really great opportunity. And one of the other advantages is I'm coming from a small nonprofit, which had a very local focus and impact. And it was really interesting to me to be able to scale up and work for an organization that has a global presence. Like it's just a whole other level, a much more established organization with a broader reach, having more impact across the world. So that was really appealing to me. And that's really what keeps me going.
Which role feels more comfortable to you, CEO or chief of staff?
I think as the executive director, I felt more comfortable for sure, which is not always a good thing. I think when we get too comfortable, then we don't stretch ourselves and we don't learn. So I'm in a position now where I'm not always comfortable, which I see as a positive. It's making me stretch. It's making me challenge myself.
I love that. So you found the chief of staff role at Fairtrade USA. Tell us more about the organization.
So Fairtrade USA is a nonprofit organization, and we are the leading certifier of fair trade products in North America. And we have a fair trade certified seal, so you can see it on many products, much like the USDA organic seal or the non-GMO seal. It's a third-party certified seal. And when you see that on products, it just signifies that it was made according to rigorous fair trade standards, which promote sustainable livelihoods and safe working conditions and protection of the environment and sustainable farming practices, as well as strong transparency in supply chains. So fair trade is really a market-based approach to poverty alleviation. We are, rather than creating dependency on aid, fair trade empowers farmers and factory workers and fishermen to fight poverty and earn additional money to improve their own communities.
That's great. And you were clearly familiar with the organization prior to joining. It's the same CEO, right, from the TED Talk that you had seen years prior?
Yes, it's the founder and CEO. So we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year in 2018. So yeah, it's been the same founder ever since, which makes it even more exciting because I know, I can relate to the process that he went through in starting a nonprofit, and he's just been doing it a lot longer and is taking it to a whole other level. So it's really fun to just be able to connect on that level.
That's an interesting point. I think we see, and this is purely anecdotal, but we see more entrepreneurs who become chiefs of staff serve under other founders. And I think there's something about the empathy probably that you could relate to, right? That you carry from your time as a founder that really helps when you're serving as chief of staff to another founder.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think you're absolutely right on that.
So you knew going in about this particular CEO, and you said during the interview process, you really felt that fit. There was alignment. Tell us more about that and how you feel like even during the selection process, you were starting to form rapport with the CEO.
It was just a really interesting interviewing process. I guess my first conversation was with the head of people, and I connected really well with her. And at the end of the conversation, she wanted to introduce me to the CEO. So we had scheduled a video chat on Zoom, and it didn't take more than 5 minutes for me to realize that he was exactly the leader that I aspired to be. I can't say exactly why that was, but I could just tell that he was so driven by the mission of the organization, and that is how I live my life. And the way that he expressed himself and the organization in general, the way he described it and the state of the organization, how they're poised to scale. There just seemed like so much opportunity to bring in and establish this new role that nobody had been a part of. Having that kind of entrepreneurial opportunity in an established nonprofit was just really exciting to me. And he clearly needed somebody that could step up and hit the ground running, that didn't need to be micromanaged, who could work very independently and had a broad set of skills that he could really leverage throughout the organization. And I just felt like everything that we talked about, I knew that I could do it, whether I'd done it before or I was up for the challenge. But we just seemed to be on the same page about developing this position together in an effort to really, build structure and improve efficiency in the organization and help him be more successful in his role. Because in order for the organization to be successful, the CEO needs to be successful. So we just seemed to be on the same page across the board. And that was just really, really helpful.
I love describing the first time a chief of staff role is used as entrepreneurial, because you're absolutely right. You're crafting the role, you're standing it up for the first time, and you're building it from scratch. Like, it didn't exist before. You have nothing to go off of, and you're figuring it out, much like you had to do when you started a nonprofit. So I love that analogy. And I'm curious, from what you know now, where did this consideration for a chief of staff role come from for your CEO?
I believe it was actually recommended by one of the board members, to tell you the truth. I think that's where it originated. And I've spoken to that board member and sought his advice on how to be successful in this role, because he had worked with chief of staffs in the past. So that was really valuable to have that conversation and just kind of understand in the context of Fair Trade USA, where he thought that I could bring most value and success in the role. So yeah, that's how it originated.
That's really good to know. And that's common, to be honest, where a lot of executives don't even know it's an option or that they should be considering it until it's really brought to their attention by someone else who's more familiar with the role. So it's so interesting to me, because I'm picturing the two of you like figuring out this new role, and neither of you really knowing much about it, I'm sure. Tell us what the early days were like and how you started forming partnership even in the early days of this role.
Well, I guess I'll just mention that during the interview process, I was asked to put together a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which I'd never been asked to do in an interview before. Like, that was taking it one step above and beyond. And that
Probably
was
because he didn't know. He's like, you tell me what this looks like. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I was being put through the test, and I was definitely up for the challenge. So in the long run, it actually helped quite a bit to have that plan in place when I walked in the door. And of course, it wasn't perfect, but at least I had some OKRs established, and at least I had kind of a learning plan and an outline of everything that I needed to get up to speed on, so that I could really just flow through it and hopefully become efficient as quickly as possible. And it was also helpful that they already had meetings set up for me before I started with each member of the executive leadership team. So that was really monumental in me just getting to know the organization at a high level and understanding the leadership roles and dynamics, how they work with the CEO, if there's issues, what works well, what doesn't, where a chief of staff can potentially step in and support or bring value. So from day one, relationship building was really high on my list. And I went the next level down and started meeting with managers and directors across the organization after that, and just kind of working my way around the office to better understand what's going on across the organization. And I think that was helpful because it's a new role and it's kind of a peculiar role. Like, nobody really knows what a chief of staff is, and it's different in each organization, no matter who you talk to. So I think it was important for me to kind of explain to people like why this position is here and how I can help and how I can collaborate with you. So that was definitely a big part of my learning strategy in the first 30, 60 days, is to just build relationships and better grasp the workings of the organization from a high level.
Right. I love that. I think relationship building really does have to be front and center for this. I'm curious to know more of your onboarding plan that you put together. So in addition to relationship building, how did you think about those early months in the position?
That's a great question. And I really looked for guidance from our CEO and our executive leadership team on that. I definitely chartered my own path, but I checked in quite a bit to make sure that I was moving in the right direction. And then I referred back to my 30, 60, 90-day plan to make sure that I was touching all the different facets that we had outlined during the interview process and I needed to get engaged in. Because of course, you're going to want to move quickly in some areas because they're really exciting and they're front and center, but I didn't want to neglect all of the other areas as well. So I tried to keep it pretty well balanced throughout and kind of just went in with an objective mind frame, just knowing that I have to learn as much as I possibly can in the next 3 months in order to be effective. And I'm going to do that in a rigorous way, and I'm going to stick to the plan, and I'll pivot as I need to, as things come up and priorities happen, and I understand that, but I just never lost sight of the plan, and that was really helpful.
That's great. I think it's such a good exercise to go through that before you begin, thinking a step ahead, right, about what this role will really mean when you get started and what you need to be successful. And I think to your point, it very much is that observation and learning phase that's so important to then being more effective when you are integrated and feeling like you can get productive sooner than, having to learn as you go and not taking the time up front.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And at the same time, I was doing a ton of research on my own. So before even stepping into this role, I did a lot of research online and started connecting to other chief of staffs on LinkedIn to better understand what their jobs were and how they work. So it was kind of a combination of getting guidance from within the organization, but doing a lot of my own research so I fully understood the breadth of this position and what the possibilities were, and just seeking mentorship from other people who are in this role. So that was a valuable asset in this whole process.
So you mentioned OKRs, objectives, and key results earlier. When you were putting together your onboarding plan and just thinking about this position, I'm curious from your perspective, how did you think about measuring success in your chief of staff role?
Well, my success is really measured upon the success of the CEO and vice versa. So my OKRs are basically his OKRs with the same objectives, and some of the key results are different as he has a more strategic focus and I have a more tactical focus, more actionable items. But we have to be aligned in order to make this work. So I really started from his OKRs and worked from there to develop my own.
Definitely. I think most chiefs would agree with you on that. Were there any special projects that weren't part of your CEO's OKRs that you added to yours?
Not right away, but as I got further into the role, more special projects kind of popped up, and I kind of started filling in the gaps across the organization where we knew that, maybe somebody needed to work on something, but the team didn't have the capacity or the resources to do it. So I've kind of filled the gaps in several ways and taken over some responsibilities from other people across the organization just due to the fact that I was now there and capable of doing it. So one example is I took over management of our monthly all-staff meetings, which is not necessarily something that the CEO would be involved in, but he is responsible for culture and organizational development. So it does tie into that objective, but actually taking on like the planning and agenda development and prep and just implementation of those monthly meetings in general was something that wasn't in the original role description and I expected to get involved in, but something that I've enjoyed doing thoroughly.
I'm thinking about your entrepreneurial background again and thinking, I'm sure there's probably many times when you haven't asked for permission. And you can't really in a chief of staff role, right? You just do, and you figure out what is going to make the most sense. And then, you seek forgiveness if needed on the back end. But it sounds like that's really what you've lived by as chief of staff.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of my work is directed, but there are a lot of times where I'll see that things could be more efficient or people need to be connected more or talking about a particular topic. And because I have kind of a bird's eye view across the organization, I'm able to kind of see those connections that maybe not everybody can. So trying to kind of be the cross pollinator within the organization and making sure that everyone's connected on what they need to be connected on, and working on processes and putting together protocols for better communication and best practices across the organization. And I'm still in that phase, just kind of identifying ways that we can optimize the way that we work together across the organization, and just putting together, good practices that we can all work from. So we're speaking the same language and we're standing on the same foundation, and hopefully saving time in the long run.
So you're still only 8 months in.
6 months.
6 months, not even 8. So I'm curious, do you feel like you're fully productive yet?
I feel like I'm definitely fully productive, but I feel like I still have so much more to learn. So I'm just getting started.
Right. That's a good spot to be in. I will tell you. Yeah. Is there anything you would change about your onboarding plan now that you've gone through those first 30, 60, 90 days?
No, I don't think so. I definitely don't have any regrets. It's my goal for the next person to be in this role, whenever that may be, no time soon, but to maybe, have succession documents in place and just make that transition a little bit easier, because I've been working hard to put together processes and systems and all of those things. But honestly, that's part of the joy in this work for me, is to be able to develop some of that stuff from scratch. So I've quite enjoyed it.
I'm curious, how do you describe your role to others on the team?
That's a great question. And I think it always depends on the context of the conversation, because I play a lot of different roles across the organization. But most importantly, I get stuff done. And that's the way that the CEO introduces me to a lot of people, is this is Mary. She gets stuff done in the organization. And different people have said different things. I've been called the accountability partner for the leadership team. I've been called the glue that holds the team together. It's hard to just have one elevator pitch for this role, because it's different things to different people in different contexts at different times. And there's always varying priorities that kind of take precedence. So it really just depends on who you're talking to in the context of the conversation.
I could not agree more. I think that's absolutely true. So are there any other questions I didn't ask, or any other topics that you want to discuss?
Not necessarily. I would just like to say to those aspiring chief of staffs out there, I was not an aspiring chief of staff. It wasn't my goal to become a chief of staff necessarily. It's kind of a role that finds you. So if you have a background where you are very adaptable and you're a rapid learner and you like to explore the intersection of different fields and ideas and concepts, that's really where the innovation happens. So if that kind of describes you, then maybe this is the right field for you. But I'm not necessarily sure that one can just set out and say, I want to be a chief of staff and seek out that role. I really feel that you build up to that role through your experiences, and when it's ready, it'll find you.
Thanks for listening to the Chief of Staff Collective podcast. You can hear us on your favorite podcast app every other Monday. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review so you don't miss an episode.